Doctors, what is the worst homemade cure a patient used for their illness? Story 1. An older woman with a big, gaping foot ulcer visited her family in Indonesia. Her sister took her to a spiritual healer, who instructed her to make an ointment and apply it to the ulcer. The ointment included herbs, sheep urine, olives, human hair. The day after applying the ointment, she was to cleanse the ulcer in the ocean. After a few weeks of this, the ulcer would heal. Obviously, it did not heal, and a rare mycoplasma bacteria found only in the ocean grew in her wound, and she lost her foot. Story 2. Nurse here. I used to work in a rural magnet hospital in the South. Had a patient who was there because had gotten an athlete's foot and decided to use an old mountain remedy, soak your feet in vinegar, lemon juice, and boiling water to kill the fungus. In fairness, the original remedy probably called for merely hot water, but the guy went a little overboard with the temperature. He gave himself some nice bilateral third-degree burns on his feet, but there was no sign of any athlete's foot, so he had that going for him, which was nice. Story 3. I knew someone who got cancer and decided to starve it instead of taking chemo. First results after the 40-day fast were promising, but not for long. He died in less than a year. The sad part is the survival rate with chemo for this type of cancer is really high, and it was detected early. Story 4. Doctor in the family told me an infant was brought into the ER incredibly ill, shaking, and vomiting from her daycare. She had a huge oral ulcer in her mouth that her mom tried to cure by killing the bacteria, but they were out of mouthwash, so she diluted vodka in apple juice. She had the "can I see the manager" haircut, and threw a huge fit when CPS was called. Story 5. I took my daughter to the DR for a recurring ear infection. When she was about 4, the doctor took one look in her ear and asked me if I'd seen her putting any foreign objects in her ears, and I said no. He then took some tweezers and pulled out a small piece of what turned out to be garlic. I told him I had no idea how it got there. He said it was definitely making her ear infections worse. Turns out that her dad and stepmom had heard that garlic oil can help cure infections, and they didn't have any. So, instead of taking my daughter to the doctor like they should have, they literally just shoved a small clove of garlic in my daughter's ear and left it there. Story 6. Paramedic. Once had a patient diagnosed with a cancerous growth on his ear. He took care of it himself with fingernail clippers. It got so infected by the time he called 911, we could see his jawbone through his cheek. Story 7. Not a doctor, but the son of one. There was a guy who would go in once a year or so for checkups. He had surgery on his foot and needed it looked at regularly. My dad was the surgeon. So, anyways, one day guy comes in for his appointment. Says he isn't feeling well, thinks he might have gotten the flu from his kids. No big deal. Unrelated illness happens, right? Well, he was talking to my dad before he took his shoes off. He was beaming. Yeah, I fell pretty hard, gashed my foot open, but I fixed it myself, saved a trip to the hospital. Well, lo and behold, he has taken copper wire and sutured the gash shut. It had been a week and it was badly infected. That's where his flu-like symptoms came from. Had he waited a few more days, it would have killed him. Dad took those out, dressed it. The skin had degraded too far to sew up, properly prescribed him antibiotics, and referred him to the hospital for observation. He ended up spending $3,000 on his care instead of the $200 or so for stitches in the first place. Story 8. Nurse here. Had the fortunate luck to be privy to a patient's super-duper secret way of getting rid of leg cramps at night. Get a cork, not just any cork though, it must be from a bottle of red wine, and tuck it in between your toes at night. He was very sure that was the cure that Big Pharma wasn't telling us. Completely irrelevant that he started taking a magnesium supplement at the same time as his newfound super cure of toe cork fondling. So Big Pharma, if you're reading this, we all know now. Story 9. Told patient to apply cream to their foot. They ignored my advice and just kept rubbing garlic over it. They later came back and I told them their foot is getting worse because they aren't using their cream and they now need to go to hospital. They ignored me and kept just rubbing garlic. Eventually they lost their foot. Story 10. This isn't from something I've seen clinically, but if you look it up, there's news articles about FB groups of parents who encourage each other to do horrible bleach enemas or to make their kids swallow caustic chemicals to cure autism. And then when the kids get agitated and shed their intestinal lining, they consider it a sign that it's working. This is literal child abuse. Story 11. Not a doctor, but a pharmacist who works in an ER. I had a woman come in for chest pain, and when I was interviewing her for her medication history, she was telling me how bad the pain was that she took everything in her medicine cabinet. I asked her to list what she has in her medicine cabinet, what she took. The list went Tylenol, acetaminophen, 2 tablets, Advil, ibuprofen, 2 tablets, aspirin, 2 tablets, heroin, 1 to 2 points, gravel, at which point I kind of had to go hold up. You use how many points of what? And the patient very matter-of-factly stated that she came in because the heroin didn't help with the pain at all, which in some ways I guess was a pretty reasonable course of action, since she came in since the heroin didn't work. Story 12, not a doctor, but my vet friend once had a client rub butter all over her cat in hopes that the cat would lick it off because the cat had stopped eating. Story 13 had a patient who couldn't sleep because she had gotten bug bites on her legs, keeping her awake. Her cure: she poured boiling water on them, gave herself third-degree burns to treat her bug bites. Story 14, dermatologist here. Dude was trying to get rid of his papulopustulose acne with a homemade mask, which consisted of a mix of betamethasone ointment, honey, cream cheese, yogurt, banana, and makeup and cream for color. So many bad things here. And the dude developed a nodular cystic acne after 3 or so applications, which he did daily because, of course. Who suggested this abomination? Various YouTube videos and his own initiative of mixing everything in a bowl to cure faster. Story 15, not a DR. I'm an X-ray tech in a hospital, had a patient with a breast infection. She attempted to treat it with Neosporin. When she finally came to the ER, there was just a huge gaping hole on her chest where the breast used to be. The smell in the room was overpowering, to say the least. It turns out you can't cure breast cancer with Neosporin. I don't know if she survived or not. Story 16, my patient came in complaining that her skin turned blue after ruling out that she was a smurf. I asked her if she'd been using any alternative products. Turns out she had been ingesting colloidal silver with the belief that it would prevent infections. Story 17, not a doctor. I work at a grocery store deli. One lady, who is a regular, is convinced that magnets cure body ailments. She has magnets in her car. Occasionally she'll make a big show of being unable to breathe. She is fine, and don't call the ambulance. She will walk all the way outside of her car, bring the chintzy fridge magnets back inside to our back corner. Then by rubbing the magnets on her chest through all of layers of clothes, she is cured and doesn't need the paramedics or medical help. And don't get her started on how oranges and vitamins are the cure for autism. Really, you don't? I will slap your hand so hard. Story 18, other side. Of the patient, I was on a business trip. When my tooth implant fell, I had still a full day on a strange city. Next week, I proudly went to my dentist, feeling better than MacGyver, bragging how smart I am. So I needed something pliable, harmless enough, and that would hold the tooth for a couple of hours. You will nev. You use bubble gum? What? How can you possibly know? You are far, far from being the first who thought about that, and will not be the last. Either clue for my bubble burst without chewing gum. Story 19, I did clerical work for a naturopathic physician. We had a number of folks treating arthritis with gin-soaked golden raisins. 9 a day, no more, no less. Story 20, my aunt has this concoction of basically just rubbing alcohol and marijuana leaves, seeds and stems, and for whatever crazy reason she thinks that if you rub it over an ache that it will magically make it go away, lol. She calls it the brujeria. Story 21, not a doctor yet, but work in EMS. The number of folks who think WD-40 will help arthritis pain is abnormally high. Also, though this is not explicitly a home remedy, but the people who think things will just cure themselves with time, yes, this works sometimes. Yes, healthcare is financially prohibitive, but if something has been debilitating you for more than 72 hours, it probably won't be going away anytime soon. Just go get it checked. It's cheaper to treat something over time than to go, oh, I suddenly need $500K for this procedure or I'm going to die. Story 22, not a doctor or related to any, but my mom, no medical qualifications whatsoever, decided after I got a nasty cut on a plant while on a walk that a medieval cure for minor cuts that she saw at a fair would do the trick. She spat on a leaf and put on my cut. It stung like, and made injury even worse. I've never trusted her with any injury I get since. Story 23, many of these responses are funny, but it's sad knowing that people resort to these things because healthcare is so freaking expensive. Like, god damn it, I hate the world. Story 24, I'm a paramedic, and my partner told me the worst he has ever seen was for a burn patient. He said that he saw a teenager hobbling towards him covered in a bunch of white, gooey gunk. So apparently homeboy was out in the country trying to start a big bonfire, and he first decided to douse his big bundle with some gasoline before tossing a match in. Well, it caught real fast, and he got a big OL flash burn across his whole body. His mama apparently used to be a certified nurse, and covered him in mayonnaise, because that would help treat the burn. All she did was introduce a fuck ton of infection into his body and make it much more excruciating for him, while my partner had to wipe it off of him and place burn bandages on him while they transported him to the hospital. Story 25, I'm a urologist. I had a patient come into the ED with wire wrapped around the head of his penis. He attached this to what I think were popsicle sticks and another band of wire around the base of his penis. It was like a penis splint. He said it was to give him erections. The wire had eroded through his skin, and his corporeal bodies were exposed as well as his urethra. This actually appeared to be just ischemic necrosis and wasn't even really infected. It was copper wire. Yes, he was homeless and mentally ill. Story 26, dentist here. I know a guy who lost a tooth, got the tooth, put some home building cement on the root, put it back in the alveole, and showed up a week later with a massive infection. He lost the tooth, 2 neighboring teeth, and some part of his jawbone. Story 27, patient of mine used daily head and shoulder shampoo enemas through a rubber tube to keep himself regular. He came in because he popped a hole in the wall of his rectum doing it. Story 28, hands down, religion. No joke, this in the psych ward said mental illness isn't real. It's all demons, and you just need Jesus. Religion is the worst cure of all. Story 29, WD-40 for arthritis on knees and elbows. Thought it was a joke at first. Said it helps with his joint pain, LMAO. Don't ask why an 80-year-old lady would feel the need to tell her optometrist that, LOL. Story 30, alcohol for a 3-year-old. Let that sink in. The parents told me that when their child had a cold, they gave the kid vodka mixed with some herbs. To top it all off, they were anti-vaxxers. I haven't had dumber patients since then. Story 31. This is a little different, but I groom dogs. An owner put oregano essential oil in their dog's ear canal to get rid of an ear infection. She brought up that it looked like it wasn't going away yet. I felt so bad when I flipped the dog's ear leather back. The ear was fire engine red, inflamed, and it hurt her to touch it. No sign of ear infection, but clear, chemical-type burns. I know it's not the popular opinion on Reddit, but I do like using a couple essential oils for minor things like sore muscles, mosquito bites, stuff like that. But oregano oil should never be put in an ear, ever. Story 32, a couple elected to pray instead of getting their 10-year-old daughter an appendectomy. She died horribly, and the parents avoided a murder charge because a sheriff department person was okay with their cult churches not believing in doctors and covered it all up. Fellow member of the church, they're living their lives today with no fear of punishment for killing their daughter. It's the same church that had people in it tried and convicted for murder in Idaho. Followers of Christ Church ID love to see justice for them, but I doubt anything will stick. Seeing them dance around all over town without a care in the world chills me to the bone. Just makes me so mad they're getting away with murder. Daughter was cool AF and was likely an atheist. Her death was a shock to everyone at school. But I didn't learn about all that BS church until I was an adult. Restitutio flamitations. Story 33, my sister, a nurse, recently had a patient who decided that apple cider vinegar was the proper treatment for heartburn. Then when that didn't work, they tried baking soda. They are now in the hospital with pneumonia because making a baking soda volcano in one's esophagus isn't a good idea. Story 34, not a doctor. I used to be a medic. During my medic course, one of the other students said that she put coffee on a second-degree burn her friend had. The instructor's mouth just dropped to the floor. Instead of cleaning it to prevent infections, putting coffee has the reverse effect. Do not do that. Story 35, not a doctor, but the patient, when I was 14 or so, I had an ingrown toenail. So instead of going to the doctor, I used an X-Acto knife, some ice cubes for anesthetic, and a diagram I found online to perform surgery on myself. Stopped partway through when I realized I didn't have anything to stitch the wound back up with. Went to the doctor, got it stitched up. The ingrown toenail didn't even require surgery, just a little more prying than I had the leverage to do before. Healthcare is free here. Story 36, not a doctor. But my job is to read medical records all day, and I know a bad idea, even I see one. This dude with type 2 diabetes had a gnarly open wound on his leg. He was trying to self-treat with essential oils. They didn't help, and the wound was just getting worse. Finally, after 3 months of the wound getting longer and deeper, the guy showed up to urgent care smelling like a corpse. The doctor looked at his leg and could see bone. He sent the guy to the ER, and his leg was amputated. Story 37, anti-vaxxers. May want to look away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Goop, or whatever the Gwyneth Paltrow calls it. But the bullshit Eve heard about this fits perfectly into any anti-vaxxer's homicidal lifestyle. Story 38, I'm a CNA working on becoming a nurse, but I work alongside them daily. Had a male that came into the hospital complaining about his backside, had a huge ulcer and was determined to be a complication from him being diabetic. He adamantly refused that he was diabetic and would not allow the hospital to treat him for diabetes because he was a truck driver, and if he had to take insulin, he would lose his license apparently. So he kept insisting that he just needed some, in his words, salve to put on this giant ulcer, because he's done it before, and it worked fine. So he said results came back from the ulcer and found he had MRSA, which was causing it to be even worse. He refused to believe the multiple doctors that tried to help him understand that he was diabetic, needed to treat that, and needed to treat MRSA with a hardcore antibiotic regimen. He refused, checked himself out AMA, then showed back up like 2 weeks later in an ambulance that a friend called for him, because he went septic and was in a real bad way. Why do you go to the hospital just to refuse everything that doctors and nurses have seen for years? He was putting bacitracin on his decubitus ulcer with MRSA in it, until he basically couldn't move. because he was drained of all energy, ended up having a whole lot of his buttock removed. Not sure what happened to him after that. Story 39, worked in pharmacy for a while, heard some wild ones, but the most prolific seemed to be coconut oil for eye infections, lube, ear infections, cystitis, thrush, oral and genital, mouth ulcers, cold sores, all sorts. Really, there was a craze a while back for it, funnily enough. It didn't seem to help, and I'm not happy about it being a lube. Condoms don't like oil-based lubricants, and just the thought of it all up in my brings to mind discomfort for some reason. Story 40, friend of mine is an OBGYN surgeon. A young lady from a religious family came in with a pair of tongs stuck in her vagina. Turns out the young lady had been using a door handle she had found as a masturbation aid. It slipped too far in, and she couldn't get out. After about a day, she finally had to tell her mom what happened. Mom was mortified and convinced she could save the family embarrassment by retrieving them herself. After trying a variety of other things, she finally tried a set of barbecue tongs, which immediately got stuck. After removal of implements and confirmation that nothing was damaged too badly, she had a private chat with a young lady about proper aids and where to get them without mom knowing. Story 41, when I was younger, our neighbor at the time had her brother over to visit. He showed us a gaping wound on the back of his hand where he had been bitten by a white-tailed spider. He was rubbing alcohol and marijuana into the wound to cure it apparently. Never saw him again. Though he rarely visited the neighbors, I think he had threatened her husband with a knife in the middle of the night once, so maybe it all worked out. Also, he usually wore a cape. Story 42, I see a pattern of people from the U.S. doing insane because they can't afford healthcare or are afraid of high bills from said healthcare. When it comes to healthcare, you're a backwards hole. Said with love, get it sorted. These stories are sad as... Story 43, not a doctor, but just wanted to share something. My aunt used to squeeze the juices of a lemon directly into my nose whenever I used to get a nosebleed. She did it for years when I was a child. It did not work. Story 44, when I was younger, my piano teacher had me sleep with wine corks between my fingers to help with my tendinitis. My hands were always super sore when I woke up. My primary laughed when I told her about that. Story 45, not a doctor, but was once told by my aunt that if I ever get pregnant and want to abort, I should put lemon juice or vinegar in my uterus. No thanks. Story 46, not a doctor, but an old friend of mine. She caught the common cold, but instead of her mom taking her to the doctor, she gave her a mixture of deer blood and horse semen to drink. She threw it up, and only after she got much worse was she taken to the doctor. When she got out of the hospital, she told me that her mother was now in prison for child abuse and neglect. Story 47, I teach first aid. So of the worst ones, butter, toothpaste, ketchup, or honey for severe burns. Peeing on jellyfish stings, just know blue bottle remedy is hot water. Boxed jellyfish is vinegar. Stop peeing on people, driving themselves to the hospital when they suspect they're having a heart attack. That's what the ambulance is for. Throwing themselves into furniture or walls if they are alone, and choking antihistamines for anaphylaxis. Allergic reaction, yes. Anaphylaxis, no. Ambulance that a stroke is a heart condition, and you should chew aspirin for it. Absolutely the worst, though, was the guy who managed to slice off his finger with a skill saw. His mate was driving him to the hospital, so patient had the finger on a towel on his lap. He was getting so nauseous looking at it that he threw it out the window. I mean, why no, just onto the floor or back seat. So yeah, he now has 9 fingers. Story 48, I'm a paramedic, and just took a 17-month-old to the ER with what I diagnosed as 3 Irishmen worth of drunk. He had a low-grade fever and chesty cough with sputum production, but I couldn't explain the wobble and obvious loss of all cognitive skills. I was checking his ears and looking for neurologic things when Grandma told me she boo-fed him a nip of Jameson. Can hardly wait for this investigation to start. Story 49, I'm not a doctor, but when I was in the Peace Corps in Samoa, there was an outbreak of pink eye that shut down school. The local remedy was fresh breast milk and or used tea bags in the eyes. Story 50, there's an urban legend here in Mexico. The staff from this government hospital tells the story of a woman who had cockroaches inside her vagina. She was a very undereducated person, obviously, but her reasoning was that alive cockroaches like to eat semen, so it's the perfect natural contraceptive, I know. WTF. So this person was catching the bugs and proceeding to stuff them into her for contraceptive purposes. It is a very popular story, but I cannot confirm if it's actually true or not. Story 51, to treat a yeast infection. The patient had inserted a sweet potato into her vaginal canal. She forgot about it until she saw vines emerging from her vagina. She went to the DR for help safely extracting the thriving plant. Story 52, not a doctor, but there was a scam in 1900s where they said if you drink mercury, you get really good health or immortality. One guy just got all his skin turned blue. Edited, it was colloidal silver, not mucky, my bad, lol. Story 53, not a doctor, but I heard about a man with plaque psoriasis who used a steel wool pad to scrape off the patches. He said it worked pretty well. I'm sure it hurt like a though. Story 54, no doctor, but I once had with a female that had a rather smelly and left some of the stench on myself. I had to go to class about 5 minutes later, so I decided putting lemongrass extract on my genitals and massaged it in. What happened over the next 10 minutes can only be described as Satan's fury being released onto my genitals mixed with the pleasant smell of lemongrass. Mama did raise but I was definitely shedding a tear in the classroom, whilst people asking why I smelled of essential oils. TLDR, put lemongrass extract on your genitals if you like to suffer. Just Google Steve Jobs cancer treatment to see the worst case given his wealth, education, etc. Story 55, not a doctor, but my dad is a religious fundamentalist who loves trying to force me to do religious cures, such as eat nothing before 12 p.m. every Saturday, and then pray in order to fix my knee pain, do weird religious hypnosis bullshit, in order to fix my depression, multiple anxiety disorders, and suicidal thoughts with his creepy priest. Told his priest realtor friend that I was sick, and he told my dad that I should say a mantra 108 times every Saturday in order to be cured. It didn't work because my illness is degenerative. Some examples from my dad's family who believe the exact same thing: pray harder and eat a certain meal once a week in order to get rid of the devil inside of my uncle. The devil was actually seizures. Drink salt water to cure your kidney stones. She drank only kidney stones and was very surprised, Pikachu face, when she got even more kidney stones, but she still drinks salt water. Recite a certain prayer 108 times a day instead of getting medical treatment for her type 2 diabetes led to my aunt dying. Story 56, not a doctor, but the daughter of a pulmonary and critical care doctor. My dad came home, and I asked him how his day was, and he told me about a patient that repaired walls, remodeled houses, and was also a smoker. The man had emphysema and asbestosis. Asbestosis is the irritation of the lungs due to the inhalation of asbestos fibers. Lengthy exposure can lead to scarring of the lung tissue. The exposure came from that pink insulation and possibly the drywall. Apparently, the leading cause of emphysema is smoking, and cigarette smoke damages the air sacs in the lungs to a point where they can no longer repair themselves. This can lead to respiratory failure. The dude said that he had been trying to treat it with his mom's homemade pasty mixture of bentonite clay, coconut oil, marigold petals, and essential oils. He later experienced respiratory failure and needed oxygen therapy to treat both the respiratory failure and asbestosis. Story 57, had a lady come into me for a review of ongoing odor in her vagina. The minute she sat down, there was a plume of throat noxious smell. 2 minutes later, about 5 cloves of garlic removed from her vagina. Sprouting, they had been in so long. Joking about the sprouting. Story 58, I'm an ER scribe. Guy comes due to cellulitis on his arm from 4 drug use. I think it was meth. He didn't want to use antibiotics to treat the infection, so he had been rubbing oregano oil over his arms and any other place he was shooting up. Homeboy smelled like fine Italian dining. He was admitted and put on 4 antibiotics. Story 59, not a doctor, and not sure if this counts, but my mom used to have a big thing of apple cider vinegar. Not sure if it actually helped with anything, though. Story 60, my uncle is an incredibly hard man to kill. He lives in Africa, has been shot several times, once jumped off a cliff into the ocean at the exact time the tide went out, was in traction for a while for that one, and still has a bullet lodged just at the base of his skull. Nevertheless, for my wedding, he made the 14-hour flight. He's scared of flying and ended up in hospital on the receiving end of an angioplasty. Why? Had been getting chest pains before the flight, and instead of going to the doctor like a rational person, he instead went to a Zulu Sangoma witch doctor who prescribed a half a cup of methylated spirits diluted in water. He took this cure the day after he arrived, and 2 days before my wedding. Thank goodness for travel insurance. Story 61, not a doctor, but my best friend is a RN. I can't tell you the number of times people think herb species can actually cure disease. There's a reason modern medicine has been invented. It's because herbal remedies aren't effective. Honorable mention prayer in attempts to cure diseases. Edit grammar. Story 62, saw this patient in the ER for abdominal pain earlier in the day. Negative workup. Discharge home with a prescription for an antacid. The patient gets home, does some reading on the internet because the experts they saw clearly weren't enough. They read that there are bacteria in the GI tract. How do you kill bacteria? Well, bleach, of course. So they drank bleach, quickly discovered that was a bad idea, and returned to the ER. Story 63, not a doctor, but a child who survived a hair-brained remedy idea. To begin, I should explain that I have very, very, very thick hair. I have broken brushes in half getting through tangles. I have to use elastic headbands as ponytails because regular ponytails snap. Thick hair, at one point when I was a kid, Lice was going around the school. This happens, however, even after emptying several full bottles of medicated lice shampoo on my head. My hair was so thick, they just kept keeping on. My mother, whom I have a whole buttload of various horror stories of an emotional baggage from, and my Aunt Sam get together and put on the old thinking caps. What could kill these stubborn lice? Rubbing alcohol nearly killed me with my asthma, but not the bugs. Then they struck idiot gold. Somehow they reasoned that they should use kerosene. They absolutely drenched my head in the stuff. No matter how much I washed my hair for the next month, it smelled like the stuff. I was terrified of open flames like no rational person should be. Lice did die, though. This was done forcibly to me again as a teenager. It worked once. ITL worked twice, right? You're still half expecting to end up with skin cancer on my scalp. Story 64 semen injections for back pain. Story 65. There was this guy in the USA that thought he was too macho to get medical help, so he just cut away his skin cancer with a knife and died from surprise cancer. Found a video I watched about that case like half a year ago for the interested. Story 66. I dated a nurse. She had a patient come in with a fungated breast cancer. So fungus cancer was already a worrying start to the story. The patient had been treating it herself with daily applications of Manuka honey. It hadn't worked, just made the cancer sticky. It had the texture of cooked cauliflower and bits would crumble off when they had to wash her. Extra story mom is a nurse and had a patient present with cancerous ulcer on their leg. It wasn't too bad, but the patient had covered it with a tea towel, which they secured with elastic bands. They were a bit elderly and confused and left it for weeks before seeking help. The ulcer wasn't too bad, but there was wound around their leg from the elastic being too tight, which had gone septic. Story 67, not a doctor, but my dad's buddy in college thought he could get rid of crabs by spraying his junk and pubes with Raid spray. Did not end up going very well. Story 68, my dad had a patient who visited some fake natural doctor of some sort. This fake doctor prescribed the patient a walking stick to cure chest pain. It was some sort of spiritual thing where the patient had to walk with the staff a certain way. Surprise, it didn't work. Story 69, not a doctor, but my stepdad is. My mom was also an ER nurse. A woman came into the hospital with sprouts coming out of her vagina. She stuffed a potato in there to cure a yeast infection. She must have forgotten about it, although how you could or couldn't get it out. Story 70, not a doctor, but had a patient once for nephrostomy tube placement whose primary complaint was a bladder infection and hydronephrosis. Bladder infection was caused by the patient putting lavender essential oil inside of her urethra. She wanted us to dip her nephrostomy tube into lavender essential oils before inserting it into her kidney. Story 71, not a doctor, but I did something really stupid a few years back, had a terrible sore throat, and went online looking for homemade remedies, read about someone putting cayenne pepper in a honey, and taking that. So I did. Cut to me 4 days later, getting an endoscopy because I had burned my esophagus so badly I couldn't eat or drink. Yay for internet cures. Story 72, not a doctor. My cousin who lived with my grandma for a short time because of her abusive mother told us when she started living with us that my grandma would have her drink lemon juice and sriracha sauce mixed together when she was sick to stop her from coughing. It obviously didn't work. Story 73, I used to work in a shop where we sold, among other things, essential oils. Now, I don't think they are that bad when used with common sense. A gaping, infected wound in the neck being treated with essential oils is not common sense. Story 74, the house I live in has an open-air room for a TB sufferer because her parents believed fresh, icy air all winter long was the best cure for her condition. She died at 14 in 1906. Her family portrait is on my wall. She's dead in it. Story 75, not a doctor, but when I had mono, my mother put a cut onion next to my bed and said it would in all the bacteria and I would be fine in a few days. Ended up having mono for almost a month and got strep for 2 weeks directly afterwards. Story 76, I'm not a doctor, but once I sprained my ankle so badly it would collapse if I put any weight on it, and my mother insisted on saran wrapping it with healing salves instead of buying me a 30 ankle brace. Story 77, if I have one more family, take elderberry instead of Tamiflu when they are positive for the flu or antibiotics. When they have pneumonia, I'm going to lose my mind. Story 78, not a cure, but a test. A Bedouin in Saudi came into hospital and was diagnosed with a heart condition. He left with his pills, but he didn't trust these doctors in their white coats, so he tried out the pills on his camel first. It died. He was really pissed at this, so came back to the hospital with his rifle looking for the DR. Story 79, not a physician, but I worked closely with them. My favorite was an elderly lady with a prolapsed bladder, put powdered sugar on it, and pushed it back in, because the nice man at the health food store told her that would work. Surprise, surprise, the sugar didn't help. Story 80, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and would make a tincture from dried mushrooms and vodka. She was convinced this was treating her cancer along with medical cannabis. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for medical cannabis, but it's not going to fix stage 4 cancer. She was very out of touch with reality due to encephalopathy. She died and was in denial about her condition the whole time. Story 81, not a doctor, but this girl I used to talk to got into homeopathy. She told me that I needed to stop taking my medications for my glaucoma because I was putting poison into my body. She insisted that I should let my body do its thing and bring everything back into balance. JFC. Story 82. This is similar, but it's the doctor instead of the patient. Once we had the doctor try and help a patient with a sore throat. He'd bash her neck with a shoe before escaping. His reasoning was that she can't have a sore neck if she has no neck, which I guess is right. We found him at Home Depot looking for a pointer doctor stick. Story 83, not a DR. We had a patient take herself off of her blood thinners because she thought taking 4 garlic supplements was healthier. She had to saddle multiple pulmonary emboli. Story 84, fermented and using baby as a face mask. Not a doctor, but my second cousin mentioned it when she was over for Thanksgiving. It was disgusting, and the worst part is her boyfriend didn't know.